"You're not our dad. You're just the man Mom married." The words hadn't yet been spoken outright, but I could feel them pulsing beneath every shrug, every glance that slid past me as if I were invisible. They hung in the air between us, like smoke curling through the rooms of my own home, waiting for the day they'd finally ignite into flames. My name is Alex. I'm 44 years old, and for 6 years I have been married to Kate. She came into my life carrying 2 children from her previous marriage, Jake, who is 17 now, and Hannah, 15. When I said my vows, I didn't just marry her. I married into the fractured pieces of a family. And from the first day, I told myself I could be the one to hold those pieces together. I threw myself into the role with a kind of desperation that, looking back, almost embarrasses me. I told myself that love wasn't only blood, that loyalty could be built, brick by brick, through sacrifice. I became the driver, the fixer, the tutor, the one-man support system for every crisis, big or small. If Jake needed to be driven across town for basketball practice at 10 at night, it was me behind the wheel. If Hannah's science project collapsed the night before it was due, it was my hands hot gluing cardboard back into shape until the early hours of morning. I didn't count the hours. I didn't keep a ledger. I believed that the invisible balance sheet of family would one day add up in my favor, that consistency would outweigh absence, that my daily presence would mean more than the sporadic appearances of their biological father, Sam. Sam. The name itself tastes bitter when I say it. He was the ghost who floated through our lives whenever it suited him. He arrived with big promises, gifts that sparkled in wrapping paper, the kind of gestures that could buy a child's smile for a weekend. But he never stayed, never saw the bills, the medical appointments, the nights of fever and worry. He was the man of grand entrances and quick exits, the kind who could call himself Dad without ever proving the title. And so I became the one who proved it every day. Every school year I wrote the checks for supplies, for new clothes, for the technology they said they couldn't live without. I covered orthodontists, dentists, the braces that tightened their teeth while draining my bank account. When the house needed repairs, it was my sweat that patched walls, replaced pipes, rewired outlets. On vacations, it was me calculating the costs, booking the trips, planning every detail so they could enjoy themselves without ever knowing what it had cost. I needed to believe that one day these things would mean something, that they would see me for what I was trying to be. Not a replacement, not a stand-in, but a father in everything but blood. But the truth of living with stepchildren is not written in the moments you provide. It's written in the silences that follow. I began to notice those silences early, though I tried to ignore them. At school functions, when other parents would introduce themselves warmly, my stepchildren would hesitate before calling me anything at all. Sometimes I was Alex, sometimes just my mom's husband, never my dad. Not even in a casual slip of the tongue. At home, the silences were sharper. When Sam was scheduled to visit, the air in the house shifted. Their excitement was palpable, their chatter bubbling with anticipation. But when he canceled, as he often did, it was me who picked up the pieces of their disappointment. I was the one who suggested movie nights or surprise dinners or weekend trips to distract them from the ache of his absence. They accepted my efforts, enjoyed the distraction, but never gave me the credit. To them, I was simply filling a void that wasn't mine to fill. Kate, my wife, tried in her way to smooth it over. She would tell me, "They'll come around. It just takes time." She said it with the certainty of someone who wanted to believe it herself. And I nodded, because what else could I do? I couldn't demand their love. I couldn't buy it, though I was foolish enough to try. The years rolled forward, and with each one, I dug deeper into my role. I organized family trips Sam never paid a cent for. I covered medical emergencies without hesitation. When Jake sprained his ankle during basketball, it was me who sat in the emergency room with him until dawn, not Sam. When Hannah needed a laptop for school, it was my credit card that took the hit, not Sam's. I gave, endlessly, without asking, without keeping score. But that didn't mean I didn't notice. I noticed the way Jake would light up when his father texted, even after months of silence, but barely grunt when I offered to drive him to practice. I noticed the way Hannah clutched the necklace Sam gave her for Christmas, wearing it proudly, while the bracelet I bought sat untouched in her jewelry box. I noticed how Kate would sometimes hesitate before asking me to cover another expense, as though she knew what she was asking, but did it anyway. I told myself it was all worth it, that this was the price of building a family that wasn't mine by blood but could be mine by choice. I told myself that one day, maybe on some quiet evening, Jake would thank me, that Hannah would see me as more than the man who shared their roof, that Kate's children would become our children. But the silence continued, and silence can be more brutal than any words. I remember one Thanksgiving in particular. We had hosted the whole extended family, Kate's parents, her siblings, their kids. I cooked the turkey, mashed the potatoes, baked pies until the kitchen was drenched in heat and flour. When it came time to toast, Kate thanked everyone for coming, thanked her parents for their support, thanked her kids for making this house a home. She didn't mention me, not once. The omission wasn't intentional, I think. It was simply instinct. I was there, of course, but invisible. Always invisible. And yet I stayed. I stayed because I believed in what I was building. I stayed because I thought love was patient, that it would bloom in time. I stayed because walking away felt like failure, like abandoning not just Kate but myself. But deep down I began to suspect the truth, that no matter how much I gave, no matter how much I sacrificed, there would always be a line I couldn't cross. A wall built not of malice but of blood. A wall that separated me from them. One they would never tear down, no matter how hard I knocked. The silence told me that. The glances, the hesitations, the lack of acknowledgement told me that. And yet I still believed. Still told myself that one day they would see. One day they would know. I didn't realize how wrong I was. Not yet. That revelation would come later, sharper and crueler than I ever imagined. For now, I was still building, still believing, still blind. Still waiting for a family that wasn't really mine. That summer, I thought I had finally done it. I thought I had built something undeniable, something no silence could erase. The plan had taken months of work. I pored over websites, read endless reviews, compared costs until my eyes blurred. And finally, I booked it. A 2-week vacation in the Colorado mountains. A log cabin nestled among the pines, wide enough to fit us all with comfort, isolated enough to give us the illusion of our own little world. The package included horseback riding for the kids, guided hikes, teen activities in the nearby lodge, everything Kate had once whispered she wished she could give her children. The total came to just under $6,500. Cabin rental, meals, activities, everything prepaid so that once we arrived, all they had to do was enjoy. It wasn't just a vacation. It was a statement, a chance to prove, finally, that I wasn't just mom's husband, but a father who could give them memories worth keeping. I wanted Jake and Hannah to look back at those 2 weeks and remember not Sam, not the man who drifted in and out of their lives with gifts and broken promises, but me, the man who had been there, the man who had built something lasting. I told Kate one evening after dinner. She gasped, hands flying to her mouth, and hugged me tightly. "They're going to love this, Alex. You have no idea how much it means to them." But she was wrong. I had every idea. That's why I did it. The days ticked down with anticipation. I requested time off from work. 2 full weeks cleared from my calendar. A rare indulgence. I imagined the trip in detail. The kids' laughter echoing through the trees, evenings by the fireplace, family photos taken against the backdrop of towering peaks. For once, I thought we would all be together in the way families are supposed to be. Then came the moment that shattered everything. It was 1 week before we were set to leave. I was in the kitchen, spreading maps across the counter, highlighting trails, circling the best spots for photos. Kate came in, her expression hesitant. She sat down across from me, her hands folded tightly, like she was bracing herself. "Alex," she began softly, "there's something the kids wanted me to ask." I smiled, distracted, still tracing the trail lines. "What's that? Horseback or kayaking first?" She didn't smile back. They want to invite their dad, Sam." The marker froze in my hand. The lines I had drawn on the map suddenly looked ridiculous, like the scribbles of a fool. I looked at her slowly. They want him there? She nodded, biting her lip. They said it would be more fun if he came, that it wouldn't feel right without him. I stared at her, at the woman I had built a life with, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. 6 years of carrying her children, 6 years of paying every bill, of being there when Sam was absent. And now, at the one moment I thought I had secured a place in their lives, they wanted him. I swallowed hard. And what does that make me, Kate? If he's there? Her eyes flickered, searching for an answer she didn't have. That's when Jake entered the kitchen. He had been listening, of course he had. His face was calm, too calm. The calmness of someone who had been waiting for this moment. "You're not family," he said flatly. His voice didn't waver. It carried the weight of conviction, of rehearsed truth. "Without you, the house would be calmer." The words struck harder than any physical blow. For years I had feared them, but hearing them spoken aloud, without hesitation, without remorse, erased everything I had built in an instant. I stared at him, at the boy I had driven across town, at the boy whose medical bills I had paid, whose school trips I had covered, whose every need I had quietly shouldered while his real dad disappeared. And he looked back at me with nothing but cold dismissal, as though I were furniture cluttering his life. Kate whispered his name in shock, but he didn't flinch. Hannah stood behind him, silent, her eyes averted, her loyalty written in her silence. In that moment, years of sacrifice collapsed into dust. Every drive, every late-night project, every dollar spent, every quiet act of care. I saw them all evaporate into nothingness, as though they had never happened. I wasn't family. I was an intruder tolerated only because I kept the lights on. I wanted to argue, to remind him of the times Sam had abandoned him, of the nights he had cried when his father didn't show up, of the meals I had cooked when Sam canceled yet again. I wanted to shout, to shake him, to force him to see. But I didn't, because deep down I knew. He had seen all along. He simply didn't care. I turned to Kate, my voice low, ragged. "Did you know he felt this way?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't answer. That silence told me everything. I gathered the maps, folded them carefully, and walked out of the kitchen. My hands trembled, but not from weakness, from clarity. The years of bending, of enduring, of swallowing disrespect in the hope that love would grow. They ended in that single sentence. "You're not family. Without you, the house would be calmer." The truth was brutal, but it was also liberating. Because if I wasn't family, then I owed them nothing. And for the first time in 6 years, I began to wonder what life would look like if I finally stopped giving. The morning after Jake's words, I sat at the dining table long before anyone else stirred. The maps for Colorado lay folded in a neat stack, useless, like the ashes of a fire that had already burned out. A single sentence repeated in my mind like a curse. "You're not family. Without you, the house would be calmer." I thought about the years I had spent in silence. Holidays where I stepped aside to make room for Sam's appearances. Dinners where I wasn't invited because it might feel awkward for the kids. Family photos where my presence was politely cropped out. I had tolerated all of it because I believed there was something worth waiting for, that my patience would eventually be rewarded. But the reward never came. And now, with Jake's cold eyes staring at me like I was nothing more than a placeholder, I realized the truth. My patience had been wasted. My loyalty had been mocked. My sacrifices had been treated as obligations, not gifts. By the time the sun rose, I had made my decision. The first call I made was to the cabin rental office. My voice was steady, almost calm, as I told them to cancel the large lodge and rebook me into something smaller, a 2-person cabin. Cheaper, quieter, easier. The woman on the phone asked if I was sure, since I had already prepaid. I told her yes, I was sure. The children would not be coming. When I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel guilt either. What I felt was colder, sharper. A clarity that cut through years of fog. The second call was to an old friend of mine, Mark. He was in the middle of a divorce, drowning in the chaos of lawyers, custody battles, and an empty house. When I told him I had a cabin booked in Colorado and asked if he wanted to come, his voice cracked with disbelief. "Are you serious?" he asked. "I thought you were going with Kate and the kids." "Plans changed," I said simply. He didn't press for details. He just said yes. Then came the harder part. I sat at my laptop and began undoing years of quiet contributions. I canceled Jake's private tutoring sessions. I emailed the coach at his sports camp, telling him Jake wouldn't be attending this summer. I stopped the automatic transfers for their allowance accounts. Every click of the mouse was a severed thread, a lifeline pulled back. By noon, the weight on my shoulders felt lighter than it had in years. Not because I was free, but because I had finally stopped lying to myself. When Kate discovered what I had done, the house erupted. She cornered me in the kitchen, her voice trembling with fury. "You canceled the trip? You canceled their camps? Their money?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Yes." Her eyes widened. "How could you do this to them? They're shocked. They don't understand." I laughed then, a bitter sound that startled even me. "Of course they don't understand. Because they've never had to. They've never had to think about who pays, who sacrifices, who keeps this house running. They just take. And you let them." She flinched, as though my words had struck her. But she didn't deny it. I leaned closer, my voice sharp, deliberate. "I've been the one stepping aside all these years, Kate. I stayed silent when Sam showed up and stole the spotlight. I stayed silent when you asked me to sit out of dinners so it wouldn't be awkward for him. I stayed silent every time they dismissed me, every time you excused them. But when I finally draw a line, when I finally say enough, suddenly I'm the betrayer." Tears welled in her eyes. "They're kids, Alex. They don't know what they're saying. They're almost adults," I snapped. "Old enough to drive, to date, to make decisions about their futures. Old enough to tell me I'm not family. If they're old enough to say it, they're old enough to live with the consequences." The conversation ended there, but the silence that followed was louder than any shouting could have been. The kids avoided me, slamming doors upstairs, whispering in corners, their outrage spilling out in half-heard fragments. "He can't do this. He's ruining everything. Why is Mom letting him?" But I didn't bend. Not this time. When the week of the vacation came, I packed my bag calmly, methodically. Kate hovered in the doorway, her arms crossed, her face pale. "You're really going without them?" she whispered. "Yes," I said. "Who's going with you?" "Mark." Her lips parted in disbelief. "You replaced them with a friend?" "No," I said coldly. "I replaced them with someone who actually wants me there." She had no answer for that. The drive to Colorado was long, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of resentment pressing down on me. Mark sat beside me, grateful for the escape, and we talked about everything but family. The mountains rose ahead of us, sharp and unyielding, and I thought, this is what freedom feels like. Back home, the fallout was immediate. Jake texted me once, a single message that read, "Wow, you really are heartless." I didn't reply. Hannah stayed silent, though I could feel her anger through Kate's curt phone calls. Kate herself was torn between fury and despair. She accused me of blindsiding them, of betraying the trust of her children. But every time she spoke, I remembered the years of betrayal I had swallowed. The dinners I wasn't invited to, the holidays where Sam was allowed to shine, the nights I went to bed invisible in my own house. Now that I had finally stepped out of the shadows, they called it cruelty. But cruelty was what they had done to me. Death by 1,000 dismissals, a lifetime of being tolerated but never accepted. The truth was simple. I had finally matched my actions to their words. They said I wasn't family, so I stopped acting like family. Months passed. Seasons shifted, but the echo of that summer never left our house. The cabin in Colorado came and went. 2 weeks of silence broken only by the crackle of firewood and the occasional laugh from Mark as he tried to relearn what it meant to live without a family. For me, it was less laughter and more breathing. A long exhale after 6 years of holding my breath. I didn't think about Jake. I didn't think about Hannah. I didn't think about Kate. though her voice reached me through unanswered calls. I thought about myself for once. And when I came home, I knew something had shifted. The house looked the same, but the air was different. Kate's eyes carried something brittle, like glass that had cracked under pressure but hadn't yet shattered. Hannah avoided me less than Jake did, but the silence still clung to her like armor. And Jake's contempt had sharpened into something harder. He barely spoke to me at all. When he did, it was only through his mother, as though I were a language he refused to speak. But something else had changed too. A seed had been planted the day I drew my line, and slowly, painfully, it began to grow. Kate started therapy. At first, I thought it was just a way to blame me, a way to catalog my cruelty in a professional office. But when she came back, her eyes red and swollen, she began to admit things she'd never said before. How she had leaned on me to carry everything, while excusing her children's every slight. How she had stayed silent because she was afraid of alienating them, even if it meant alienating me. She said she hadn't realized how deep the wound went until the trip broke everything open. I listened. I didn't forgive. Not yet. But I listened. Hannah changed too. Slowly, cautiously. She started lingering in the kitchen when I cooked, offering small comments about school. One evening, she asked me if I could help her with a history project. The request was simple, almost casual, but it carried more weight than she knew. It was the first time in months she had asked me for anything. I didn't gush. I didn't cling. I simply said yes, and we worked quietly at the table until the project was done. Jake was different. He held out the longest. For weeks he sneered when I walked past, muttered under his breath when Kate wasn't listening. But the cracks came eventually. One night, when the house was dark, I heard him on the phone with a friend, venting. His voice carried through the thin walls. "Calm doesn't pay the bills." The words hit me like ice water. He had finally said it, the truth he had spent years avoiding. The calm he wanted, the silence of my absence, was nothing without the money that came from my presence. He was learning, slowly, painfully, that contempt doesn't keep the lights on. I didn't confront him about it. I didn't need to. The admission itself was enough. As for Kate and me, we stayed together. But the marriage changed. I no longer tried to force my way into the role of father. I stopped performing, stopped bending myself into a shape that fit their fantasy of what family should look like. I didn't try to prove that I belonged. I stopped buying loyalty, stopped paying for affection, stopped bleeding myself dry for the sake of a place at the table that was never meant for me. Now, when Sam drifts back into the picture, I don't compete. I don't scramble to outshine him. I don't buy gifts to balance his grand promises. I let him appear, let him disappear, let him spin his tales. Because in the end, he has only words. And I have receipts. The balance of power has shifted. They know now, even if they don't say it out loud, that the roof over their heads, the clothes on their backs, the food on the table, all of it exists because I allow it. Not because I'm desperate for their approval, but because I choose to provide it. And choice makes all the difference. I am not their father. They made that clear. But I am the one who carries the weight. And that means they don't get to dictate the terms anymore. Kate treads carefully now. She doesn't excuse the small cruelties the way she used to. When Jake dismisses me, she doesn't laugh it off. When Hannah ignores me, she calls her on it. It's too late to rewrite the past, but maybe, just maybe, it's not too late to reshape the future. Still, I don't pretend. I don't dream of some perfect reconciliation where they call me dad and thank me for everything I've done. That fantasy died in the kitchen the day Jake said I wasn't family. What remains is colder, but it is real. I live with them. I provide for them. But I no longer bleed for them. And oddly, in that coldness, I have found a kind of peace. I used to believe family was built on love, on words, on titles. Now I know better. Family isn't blood. Family isn't words. Family isn't even love. Family is contribution. Family is responsibility. Family is showing up. Not once, not with a gift or a promise, but every day with consistency. I showed up. For years I showed up. And when they spat on it, I stopped showing up in the ways that cost me the most. The irony is that only then, when I withdrew, did they begin to see. And so I leave the question with you, the listener, the witness to this confession. Was I wrong? Was I cruel to cut them off, to let them taste the silence they wished for? Or was I simply teaching them the truth they had been shielded from their entire lives? That family is not a word you throw around when it suits you, but a debt you repay through respect. Because I can tell you this much: love without respect is slavery. And I refuse to be a slave in my own house.